Welcome to DC Insiders, where we bring you sharp views about global issues with relevance to Taiwan from the political capital of the world here in Washington, D.C. I'm your host, Wenchi Yu. The US China competition is now intensely focused on technology, and at the heart of this rivalry lies semiconductors, the very components driving AI's progress.
Today, I'm signing the law of the Chips and Science Act, a once-in-a-generation investment in America itself. The Chips and Science Act supercharges our efforts to make semiconductors here in America. Excuse me, those tiny computer chips, smaller than a fingertip, that are the building blocks for our modern economy, powering everything from smartphones to dishwashers, automobiles. This increased research and development funding is going to ensure the United States leads the world in the industries of the future.
Taiwan's position as host to the world's most extensive semiconductor manufacturing ecosystem underscores its profound global importance. To gain a clearer understanding of these vital linkages, we were joined today by Jimmy Goodrich, a leading expert on technology, geopolitics, and national security, with a focus on China and East Asia. He's a senior advisor to Brand Corporation for Technology Analysis, and formerly with the Semiconductor Industry Association. Welcome, Jimmy.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Trump announced TSMC's $100 billion announcement in the U.S. Over the next 4 years.
Today, Taiwan Semiconductor is announcing that they will be investing at least $100 billion in new capital in the United States over the next short period of time to build state-of-the-art semiconductor manufacturing facilities. I think mostly it's going to be in Arizona, which is what I understand, which is a great state.
You were involved in the creation of the CHIPS Act, which passed in the Biden administration, and had the U.S. government support of $52 billion. Now, with Trump back in the White House, does that mean the financial support is no longer? If so, how will the U.S. continue to make sure that semiconductor is strong in the U.S.?
That's a great question. So, Trump obviously at the State of the Union said we don't need the CHIPS Act, that Congress should repeal it and take the money back. But on the other hand, his Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick, in his confirmation hearing said the CHIPS Act is important. He wanted to review it, but he thought it should remain in place.
So it is currently being reviewed.
It's still, so yes, Howard Lutnick told Congress that he was going to review the CHIPS Act. I think he meant, though, review in terms of how they might want to make it better. And there's a lot of support for the CHIPS Act in Congress. In fact, the majority of the CHIPS Act investments are in states with Republican Congress members, places like Indiana, Texas, North Carolina, huge projects that are dependent on this funding.
So for the people in Taiwan, obviously Arizona is most known because of TSMC's investment. And the other states that you mentioned, these are subsidies to other companies.
Correct.
Right?
So overall, there's been more than 24 companies that have received funding as part of the CHIPS Act from the Commerce Department, from everything for leading edge semiconductor manufacturing to memory chips, companies like Micron, to legacy and analog chips for companies like Texas Instruments and Wolfspeed, to materials. For example, Global Wafers in Texas, a Taiwanese company, received a grant from the Commerce Department as well to make semiconductor materials. So it's across the supply chain, and different types of chips and technologies are being supported. Obviously, the most attention has gone to TSMC and Intel, but actually it's a much broader program than that.
Right. Well, speaking of TSMC, after the White House announcement, I don't know if you follow, but the reactions in Taiwan have been very, very mixed. There's been a lot of fear in Taiwan that TSMC will be lost to the United States. And there's even a joke in Taiwan that TSMC is pronounced as Taijidian in Chinese, but it is becoming Meijidian, which means American TSMC. And so do you think that worry is legitimate?
I don't think at all. If you look at the share of manufacturing that TSMC is putting, not just in the United States, but in Singapore with Vanguard and Germany and in Japan, if you look at the overall manufacturing that TSMC has in Taiwan, it's this much. The rest of the world is still very small, below 10% of their global manufacturing footprint. All of TSMC's advanced technology development is still in Taiwan, and all of TSMC's most advanced new fabs are being built in Taiwan, not outside of Taiwan. So I don't think people in Taiwan have anything to worry about What TSMC is doing is building sort of alternative limited production sites,
Diversification in some way.
diversifying their supply chain, but it's also part of becoming a global competitive company. Samsung has chip making operations all around the world. Intel has operations all around the world, yet their core technology still is in the US and Korea. So I don't think overall Taiwanese people have anything to be worried about small percentage of production going into the United States.
There is some kind of belief that the cost will go up if TSMC now invests more in the United States, and also whether you can truly bring the entire ecosystem to the US. So, uh, sort of the re-onshoring of US semiconductor succeed or not.
Yeah, that's a great question. And, the United States was a leader in chip making up until the roughly 2015-16, when Intel lost its process technology leadership to TSMC. If Intel had technology today that was as competitive as TSMC, the US would have 40% of advanced chip making capacity if Intel's factories were able to produce those advanced chips. So the US actually has capability, it has the supply chain. Why did TSMC go to Arizona? Intel's fabs are in Arizona. They could plug right into Intel's supply chain. Intel's supply chain is really similar to TSMC's. They're using the same chemical, material, equipment, contracting companies they use to build fabs in Arizona as they do in Taiwan. So I think actually, overall, the US has a strong capability, but the cost of operations and construction are, we can all admit, much higher in the US. That comes from labor costs, construction costs. And that was the aim of the CHIPS Act, to bring down costs for companies, to make it cost competitive to build those factories here. They may never be as cost competitive as Taiwan, but if they can be, instead of 40% more expensive, 10% more expensive, then you can close that delta significantly.
So you're basically arguing, rather than seeing the US as a competitor, Taiwan and the US strengthening that collaboration could even bring more benefits to not only TSMC and perhaps both.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's deep collaboration. If you just look at, for example, Taiwan, for the last 20 years, US semiconductor companies have purchased more than $100 billion in wafer services from Taiwanese foundries. Not just TSMC, but UMC, PowerChip, Winbon, many others in Taiwan. On the other hand, Taiwanese companies have purchased more than $40 billion in equipment from US companies to build their factories. Taiwan's memory industry was saved by Micron coming in and purchasing Nanya and other Taiwanese memory, Rexchip and other Taiwanese memory companies. So on the one hand, the US has actually done a lot to help Taiwan's semiconductor industry. There's 3 or 4 factories that would have gone out of business from the 2000 dot-com, Rexchip, Winbon, Nanya, and Micron helped keep those alive. I think it's now TSMC and Taiwan's turn to help keep semiconductor manufacturing alive in the US.
Yeah, so I think that relationship has been going on for at least 2, 3 decades. It's just now, perhaps because of TSMC, so Taiwanese look at it differently. But we also want to talk about Taiwan's concern about competition from China. It is said that within a year or two, Taiwan's market share of foundational chips will be replaced by China. And right now, it stands at around 50% of the world market right now. Do you think that's true? Is that inevitable? And if that's the case, what does that mean to the world?
So the US and Taiwan have a shared challenge of China building up rapid supply in mature node legacy chips. These go into everything from cars to industrial robotics to aerospace. Even data centers are using mature node chips for things like power management. So they're incredibly important. China is building 30 new semiconductor factories. They're poised to have upwards of 20 to maybe 50% of the market for the production of these mature node chips. And because of China's state subsidies, they can offer the same chip at half the price, which really makes it impossible to compete against. So the only way, I think, for the US and Taiwan to solve this is work together, is to combine forces, to think about how do we prevent that Chinese legacy supply from getting into our markets? How do we level the
Is
playing
that
field?
possible?
I think it is possible. You have to look at some of the tools in the toolbox, like trade remedies, maybe tariffs, export controls. but also incentives to encourage companies outside of China to purchase non-Chinese made legacy chips.
What if we say, let's just divide the labor so China can have the mature chips manufacturing and perhaps the more democratic bloc would have more
The risk
advanced
is that
chips?
we're more dependent on China. And that becomes a chokehold that China can use against other countries. If you remember, Xi Jinping several years ago said they need to deepen Western supply chain dependence on China so they can use that as a deterrent against other, Western actions against them. So we don't want to have our companies and supply chains to be dependent
Dependence.
on mainland China.
Yeah.
That's exactly what they're trying to do. And I think Taiwan and the US have an opportunity to work together on
Yeah.
that really important problem.
Well, I think, the reason why we want to focus on the chip conversation is because at the core of the recently more intensifying competition between US and China is really about technology. Um, and I think what we've heard a lot about China's breakthroughs in recent technology advancement, a lot of them in more recent years have been application software related, like TikTok, right? But until more recently, we hear the DeepSeek moment, and even now EUV technology, and then, EV charging, for example.
Battery chemistry. Yeah.
Exactly. So, and then robotics and other things. So, do we know enough about what are the other things that China is developing that are really moving ahead in the
Well,
world?
I would say EUV, not yet. I wouldn't believe all the internet discussion out there. A lot of it's coming from China. That China wants the world to think that they are a preeminent technological superpower that cannot be disturbed by Western sanctions. The reality is somewhere in between. EUV, China's still a couple of years away from having the capability to replicate that in their factories. But what China is doing is investing in basic science, their national labs, their universities to build long-term competitiveness. They've looked at, how the U.S. invested in science at the end of World War II, the Manhattan Project, Los Alamos Labs, and said, this really worked for the United States. Let's replicate it here in China.
When do you think they start to have this kind of
I
thing?
would say in 2020, China created a new science technology commission, um, and also Xi Jinping elevated science technology to one of the top 5 priorities for the party. Not just the nation, the government, but the party as well.
明确提出以推动高质量发展为主题，以深化供给侧结构性改革为主线。明确提出把科技自立自强作为国家发展的战略支撑，把扩大内需作为战略基点，强调把新发展理念贯彻到发展各领域和全过程，把安全发展贯彻到发展各领域和全过程。
What prompted him to have that kind of investment?
He'd always been focused on technology, but I think seeing how the United States was doubling down on tech restrictions really underscored for China the importance of self-sufficiency. And China's science and technology strategy is 科技自立自强, or science and technology self-sufficiency. So it's not just about being advanced, but having the capability to innovate internally, locally within their market. So that means building the universities, the infrastructure, the lasers, light sources, particle accelerators, so their scientists can conduct all of that research at home.
Yeah. Well, you just talk about China is investing in itself, and Chinese Premier Li Chang just announced a planned 8% increase in science and technology spending. And that announcement basically places Beijing as a second behind Washington in terms of government spending on R&D. Now, China's spending is at 172 billion in comparison to US current budget of 193 billion. It's pretty much on par with the US now. With this rate of increase, China will definitely surpass the US. Do you think the US is investing enough in science and technology education and R&D?
So we have to look kind of holistically. One, that's just the government spending, but you also have private sector spending. So the bulk of research and development in the United States is conducted by companies, by private sector firms. So, private companies are focused on product engineering, but what the government funds is basic research that benefits everybody. whether it's in the public health, whether it's in materials science, astrophysics, laser technology. In fact, it was the early research into lasers in the US by the national labs that ASML used to develop EUV lithography. So it actually benefits the commercial sector, and US government funding has been stagnating or declining.
Well, now with Trump back in the White House, there's a lot of funding that's been cut
Right now
related to
in
our.
public health, we're seeing a lot of cuts. Most of that has been in the public health space.
You don't think it'll cut into.
My hope is that it doesn't, but there's a lot of uncertainty right now. I think with the China competition, the Trump administration hopefully will recognize that science technology is one of the pillars of American leadership, and China is seeking to challenge it. And so this is, if you want to win the China tech competition, you can't cut research funding, particularly to the hard sciences.
Do you think the framework of US China when it comes to science and technology, does it have to be competition or can it be framed in different ways? For example, 10, 15, 20 years ago, it was more about collaboration.
Yeah, I think there are areas where the US should be collaborating scientists on global problems like global health, um, areas such as climate and renewable energy that doesn't have a competitive angle to it, some of the basic sciences, um, you know, astrophysics. But, we have to remember that there are a lot of scientific domains that are dual use that might enable some sort of military application, whether it's supercomputers that can be used to model weather patterns, but also nuclear weapons, or fusion that could be used to discover clean sources of energy or develop powerful new nuclear weapons. So, the US government has to take a risk based approach to figure out where they should cooperate and where they should protect some of their technology.
I think a lot of these areas that you just mentioned, it depends on using what kind of lens to look at it, right? And for countries that are not US or China, they're kind of in between. How do they think about it if they have always been working with both
One
countries?
final point is all should be reciprocal. Whatever cooperation our scientists are able to do with China, China should open their doors for cooperation with us too. And it's not always a two-way street. Oftentimes it's one way, China takes, and then we don't get a lot back. So it has to be a reciprocal relationship. For a lot of countries, if you talk to scientists in Europe and Southeast Asia, Japan, they don't want to pick a side. They want to be able to work with the best scientists. And
Even for Taiwan, to be honest,
for
yeah.
China, they have a fifth of the world's population. They've got millions of brilliant scientists working on cutting edge problems. Uh, Scientists don't want to sort of prevent them from getting new ideas
Right.
and working on global problems. A lot of the science today is so complex that it takes multinational teams of labs working together. And trying to disrupt that is really against the DNA of most scientists. But we are in this new era of geopolitical and technological and security competition. And so there's going to be some new rules being written. They're going to make people uncomfortable. Hopefully we can meet everybody halfway.
I think there's a lot of related thinking that this administration needs to provide guidance to, especially universities and higher ed kind of R&D.
Research security is becoming a hot topic. I think the Trump administration will continue that focus. And it's around transparency of who you're engaging with, and then rules of the road of how to engage so that you can still conduct global research, including with China, but it's done in a way that doesn't undermine U.S. national security.
Yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about it because I've heard higher ed unclear about what and how to work with China now, other than this suspicion of, even scientists with Chinese backgrounds. And so, what would be your advice? Like, where do we draw those lines?
Well, I mean, there are obviously some that want to see all ties cut. There are some in Congress that have proposed no Chinese students should come to the United States, no engagement whatsoever. But, I think the vast majority that come to the United States want to stay here. They want to contribute to the U.S. economy. They want to help contribute to global scientific progress. We should be welcoming of that. But we do need to screen to ensure that our national security is being protected. So it's not an easy question. The hard work needs to be done. There's no easy solution.
The United States, I further can say here, will not tolerate the CCP's exploitation of U.S. universities or theft of U.S. research, intellectual property, or technologies to grow its military power, conduct intelligence collection, or repress voices of opposition. The Trump administration is focused on protecting our nation and our citizens by upholding our national security and public safety through our visa process, obviously very openly and transparently applied by Secretary Marco Rubio. Every visa adjudication is a national security decision, every single one of them.
美方以意识形态和国家安全为借口，无理取消中国留学生签证，严重损害中国留学生的合法权益，干扰两国正常人文交流。中方对此坚决反对，已向美方提出交涉。美方这一政治性、歧视性做法，戳穿了美国一贯标榜的所谓自由开放谎言，只会进一步损害美国的自身国际形象和国家信誉。
Speaking of government role, want to ask about in the post-Second World War era, the U.S. government and academic institutions have worked very closely together to achieve industrialization and national security. And for a while, it seemed that they weren't as aligned, but until more recent years. And how would you suggest that we continue to think from the national interest kind of point of view, but also making sure that businesses, have their business interests that are more viable in terms of revenues and
Yeah, this is a really age-old problem. How do you balance security versus economic interests? Exactly. And, to be frank, some of the new policies coming out of this and current previous administrations are restricting revenue opportunities for U.S. companies in, say, the China market. But then that's bringing some security guarantees. I think what we're seeing is now a willingness by more tech companies to partner with the U.S. government on hard national security problems, new startups being created. I think what we'd like to see is also that happen in Taiwan. Like, for example, Taiwan needs to create drones that aren't made in China to be able to help defend its island, whether it's maritime surveillance or reconnaissance, aerial defense. Drones are a really good option. But there's not many companies outside of China that make them. But Taiwan is the best contract manufacturer in the world. If a company like Foxconn could partner with the Taiwan Ministry of Defense to help make drones.
Are they doing that?
No, not today, but because of their close ties in China, that's a huge sensitivity. So I think maybe there's a lot that Taiwan can learn from in the U.S., where you've got these new commercial companies that are willing to partner with the U.S. government.
Yeah, one of the more recent interesting developments is the defense tech. I feel like it's a whole new world.
Yeah, Palantir, Anduril, yeah.
Yeah, there's so many newer companies doing, groundbreaking work. And so how can Taiwan take advantage of this growing defense tech industry, and what should Taiwan focus on more than semiconductor manufacturing?
These companies are going to still hit a scale problem. Large-scale manufacturing is a deficit for the United States, but Taiwan is an expert in it. So there's an opportunity for Taiwanese companies to know how to scale up manufacturing, because a lot of these new systems are being built the way cars, PCs, laptops are built, not the traditional defense way of, hand screwing things together. They're trying to be more automated, more modern, and Taiwanese companies are leaders.
Really good at it.
Absolutely. And the U.S. cannot rely on China, obviously. So Taiwan is a great partner in this, if it chooses to be. The challenge, though, is all that expertise are in Taiwanese companies that have huge business in mainland China. And so if Foxconn or Pegatron or Quanta want to help in this, then the Chinese government is going to say, what are you doing? You've got your factories in mainland China.
Has that happened?
I don't think they've even had to raise concerns, because those Taiwanese companies know not to even touch it.
Yeah.
They're worried about, what kind of retaliation they might face.
And those companies that you just shared, those names, they also announced their investment in Texas. So it sounds like they're also trying to perhaps diversify
Not just in the U.S., but in places like Southeast Asia, India.
The new southbound policy is Taiwan's regional strategy for Asia. Its goals and ideals coincide with those of the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific and India's Act East policy. Working together, these initiatives can achieve mutual benefits with complementary economic and social successes.
Many Taiwanese companies, as part of Tsai's Global New Southbound initiative, that's really important to try and diversify Taiwan's investments as much as possible away from mainland China, so China cannot leverage that as sort of a coercive tactic.
Yeah. Well, with that, thank you so much, Jimmy,
My
for
pleasure.
speaking to us. I think with geopolitics as such, Taiwan has a role to play given its technology advancement in the world. Thank you for watching DC Insiders. Please follow us on social media to get the latest episode. See you next time.
Start your weekend with a cup of coffee and a moment to reflect on what happened this week.
Hello and welcome.
We've got you covered, from defense and politics to high tech and the arts.
Not just to Taiwan, the whole world is watching.
You make the coffee,
We make the news.
Here's what happened on TaiwanPlus.